Originally released as a campaign setting for 2nd edition D&D, Spelljammer finally has an official product in 5th edition's lineup. After years of anticipation and speculation, does this new product live up to the community's expectations? Hi, I'm John from Incendium D&D, and today we'll be reviewing Spelljammer Adventures in Space, as well as answering the question, is this a product that you want to add to your collection? While Spelljammer isn't the first alternative setting to be released for 5th edition, I dare say it's the most anticipated. For the past few years, every time Wizards of the Coast have held a convention presentation or a live stream, I always saw people in the comments wondering if this was the time that Spelljammer was finally going to be confirmed. And earlier this year, it finally happened. To begin with, the first thing that separates Spelljammer from previous setting guides is its structure. Rather than being a single book with multiple sections, it's actually a box set of 3 different books with a DM screen. And I mean, it's a pretty nice DM screen. It's like hardcover, way better than the flimsy thing you see in the Essentials kit. This does make the product a little bit more expensive. I think this box set retails for about $70 instead of the normal $50. But I think if you're thinking of at-the-table play, I think this structure is actually a little bit more helpful. For example, let's compare it to another recent release, Monsters of the Multiverse. Monsters of the Multiverse is part player options, part bestiary. And because of that, let's say you've got a really excited player that bought it for the player options. Well, it's going to be really easy for them to look and see what all the stats and the features of the different monsters are. Meaning if metagaming is a concern for your table, it's actually more likely that a player is going to slip into that metagame mindset because they have the material available to them. But this time, in the case of Spelljammer, we have the Astral Adventurer's Guide, which is the player resource, completely separate from Boo's Astral Menagerie, which is the bestiary. And I can even imagine you're running Light of Xerxes, gosh, I don't know what that is. The Adventure. You have the Adventure opened on one side, and you have the Bestiary open next to it. Rather than, say, something like Tomb of Annihilation, where I remember having to, hold my place in the Adventure, and then flip to the stat block in the back of the book, and then flip back. And while newer adventures have had the stat blocks where they would be used most likely in the adventure, like right next to it, I do like having all of the stat blocks collected somewhere, just not in the same book where now I'm flipping back and forth a whole bunch of times. It just makes sense to have these 3 sections separate from each other so there's an ease of referencing. And that way, if you hand the players the player resource, the Astral Adventurer's Guide, they're not going to accidentally see some sort of content you're trying to keep secret. Now that being said, this does make the product a little more expensive, because now you have to provide hardcovers for all 3 of these books. So again, is this premium price going to make the product worth it? So enough about the product's structure. Let's dive into what Spelljammer is, the actual content that you're getting. As its title, Adventures in Space, suggests, Spelljammer is an outer space adventure where you're basically on a pirate ship sailing through space from setting to setting or planet to planet. I imagine it being very close to the ship that Thor's crew rode in Thor: Love and Thunder. Another product that was not necessarily viewed favorably, but like most D&D physics, the rules are a lot more fantastical than they are scientific. There's a whole section here, like you can see in this picture, about the rules of air envelopes and gravity planes, and explanations to how traveling on a ship through wild space functions differently than how we imagine space travel to be in our real world. Spelljamming ships get their name from the pilot, a spellcaster that's attuned to the Spelljammer helm, which, even though it's called a helm, I imagined it was a helmet. It's like the helm of a ship. It's an ornate chair. And that spellcaster that pilots the ship is called the Spelljammer. And with magical interstellar travel as the basis to a story, you can imagine how wacky some of the details get. This is no better captured than through the player race options, which were teased to us through Unearthed Arcana earlier this year. They're very strange. We have astral elves, robotic autognomes, hippo people, ooze people, monkey flying squirrel hybrids, and telepathic bug people. It's very weird. Personally, I love it. And I actually do want to do a whole separate video breaking down these player options. But I don't want to include that now because I think that would distract from our core question, is this worth buying? The Astral Adventurers Guide, again, is the player resource. This is where you're going to get your player options, the rules for spelljamming ship travel and combat, and a very brief description of the hub world, the Rock of Brawl. This is where I'm going to pause for a second. Recently, we also got journeys through the Radiant Citadel. On a very cursory look, a lot of folks have said that these two settings feel very similar to each other, to which my response is, aesthetically, maybe, in that they're both kind of floating cities on a giant rock in some kind of ethereal / astral plane. But if you actually dive into these products, the focuses are very different. In Spelljammer, the Rock of Brawl takes up just a few pages, and really the meat of the setting is on the ship travel and the wide variety of places you can go. Whereas the Radiant Citadel, the actual Radiant Citadel, the hub world, is much more fleshed out. It has a very specific cultural focus, and it tends to be egalitarian in nature. I was listening to a WebDM interview with Ajit George, and one of the things Jim Davis said is he could see running an entire campaign without leaving the Radiant Citadel. Yes, it is a hub world where you can travel through portals or whatever to get to a lot of different places, but I thought that in terms of that book's focus, the egalitarian politics of the Radiant Citadel were a major thing, and were much more detailed than the 3 or 4 pages, or however many we get, of the Rock of Brawl. There's also a huge flavor difference between those two. The Rock of Brawl is more like a pirate cove, where, yes, there's technically a government, but it even says, like, directly in the book, that order is an elusive concept, and lawlessness is pretty common, whereas in Radiant Citadel, law and order and having a place worth fighting for is one of the main themes that runs through all of the adventures. The genre of Radiant Citadel is hope punk, whereas this book is way more individualistic. Now that being said, let's move on to the second book, The Light of... There's a lot of X's in that. Xerxes? Him, I think. I don't want to spoil too much of the adventure. All I'll give away is kind of, again, the structure of it to see if this is something that piques your interest. First, this is meant to be a shorter adventure. It's supposed to be run within 12 sessions. There are 12 chapters. Each chapter is only like 3 or 4 pages long, and each chapter is meant to be run as a closed session with a cliffhanger at the end. Part of this is to teach new DMs how to develop certain storytelling timing, and also it kind of provides a distinct endpoint. Whereas a lot of campaigns, like I've played Storm King's Thunder and Curse of Strahd, sometimes they feel like they're just going on and on and on. And yes, as the DM, you know that there is an end, but that doesn't necessarily translate to real world time. When are we ending the campaign? And that's where you can get players being bored of their characters after a while, all that kind of stuff. The other thing is that Chris Perkins noted in an interview with Todd Kenrick and directly in the book that the story was based off of the old serialized Flash Gordon comic strips. And so you get kind of a sense of the tone and the wackiness that's embraced by this setting. And that leads us to the third part of the book, Boo's Astral Menagerie. Again, this is a really small book, but it does have some pretty cool monster options. Just to give you a look how those are all hippo people with guns and armor. And this is an example of the Hadizee, who are like monkey flying squirrel hybrids. Oh yeah, there's also space clowns. Like the player options, some of the monsters are just kind of weird. So having perused social media a little bit to get their take on the Spelljammer content, I found that overall, the community's temperature read on this tends toward the disappointment.
All right, who's not dead? Sound off.
For one, the Astral Adventurers Guide and Boo's Astral Menagerie really just kind of support Light of Zaris, the adventure. The adventure is also shorter, and overall, the setting isn't as fleshed out as, say, something like Eberron or Wildmount. And overall, that actually makes sense. Despite Spelljammer taking up more space on my bookshelf, Eberron and Wildmount have 320 pages and 304 pages respectively. That's over 100 pages each, fleshing out more adventure sites or adventure hooks for DMs to create their own campaign stories. And looking at some of the community's wishes after getting the product in their hands, some things I've seen are for more planets to peruse, more in-depth ship rules, and random tables for generating story hooks. Now personally, this is my first official exposure to the Spelljammer setting. It's a setting that I've heard of and seen people talk about, but I've never seen the original 2nd edition material for myself. That being said, I think as a DM where I am now, I find a lot of the tools and ideas in the Spelljammer box set helpful. But if you're a newer DM or a DM that really likes having a lot of heavy guidance, I can see this book feeling a little bare bones. Is Spelljammer right for you? Well, based on the general response from the community, I'm gonna say probably not. Like I said, I was pretty happy with my purchase. I thought it was worth all the money I paid for it, but I don't want my personal feelings on the product to color what your experience with it might be. And just based on general probability, I would say that this is one you could probably skip. If you're planning on running Spelljammer and this is the only product that you have to go off of, you're probably going to be putting in a lot of work to develop the different planets and wild space systems, the ship-to-ship combat rules. There's going to be a lot of work on your end. In addition, unlike some of the other settings I've seen, I don't see a lot of the Spelljammer specific options being easily portable into other settings without seriously retuning them or changing the tone of a base setting. Like I said, a lot of these race options are very alien and strange. And although I love the strangeness of it, it may actually harm the immersion of a more serious game, or one that's a little bit more grounded in reality. But even though I'm here for the strangeness and the wackiness, I can definitely see these options disrupting the seriousness or the groundedness of other games. If you're just looking for some extra monster stat blocks or extra races, this probably isn't the product for you. So, I do want to know what all of you have to think. Are you excited about Spelljammer? If you have this product, did you feel like it was worth it? Let me know in the comments down below. If you liked this video, remember to let YouTube know, give it a like, subscribe, ring that notification bell, and have an awesome day, everyone. Bye-bye now.